What I was expecting from the birthing experience was discomfort. I wanted that natural child birthing experience in the hospital without any medical intervention. My husband and I had taken classes for birthing positions, labor techniques, breathing. We were hoping to walk the halls together. I was going to bounce on my yoga ball. We were going to try to tough it out. My mom and I had created these really cute little candy gift baskets to give to all the nursing staff to thank them. Ideally, what I wanted was to meet my son, to fall in love in the hospital like you expect to happen. And that was what the hope was. What actually happened, we lived an hour away from the hospital and the doctor's office. We had a checkup appointment 4 days before his due date. They said that I was 2.5 centimeters dilated, and we were free to go home. We walked in the front door, and my water broke, like the movies. It just was everywhere. So we got back into the car, and we drove an hour to the hospital. When we got there, they said that the baby was in a really bad position. He was up so high that they were concerned that if I walked or moved or was on the yoga ball or anything, that the umbilical cord would slip through. So I was restricted to the hospital bed, which I didn't know would happen. And when they went to go ahead and monitor his heart rate, they saw that he was in distress unless I was on my left side and not moving anything. So it was really claustrophobic, to kind of try to breathe through that and not be able to move when you were that uncomfortable every time a contraction hit. 9 hours of that, I had only dilated 1 more centimeter. So I realized, this isn't going to work. It's just not going to happen. My husband and I asked for an epidural. Unfortunately, that took 3 chances to be successful. The first 2 times, they tried in different places on my spine, and they hit a vein each time, which they kept saying, this never happens. It just must be you. So that was awesome. Thanks. The second time they hit a vein, they put medicine through, which they're not supposed to, and my blood pressure crashed. I couldn't breathe. I went cold. My limbs were just shaking uncontrollably. It was really scary. I didn't know that was something that could happen. But everything worked out, and on the 3rd attempt, it was able to alleviate some of that pain. So I was able to sit back up, and at 16 hours, it took 2 hours for the epidural. So at 16 hours total, they said, okay, you're ready to push. So I was like, all right, let's get this done. I want to meet this guy. So the doctor who was on call was not my doctor. It was some person I'd never met before. And she was truly unpleasant. She was very negative. She kept doing things without walking me through it, or asking my permission, or I just kind of felt like I wasn't even part of it, even though it was me. At one point, she called this team of 8 people to come into the delivery room, all these strangers, with my legs up in the stirrups and these lights on, and I just felt so vulnerable. And she told them, okay, let's get her prepped for a C-section. I didn't know that was happening, but they did. And so they start trying to do all these things to me, and I don't know if my son heard or not, but at that time, he just tunneled through and decided he was going to greet the world. So he arrived, and unfortunately, when he did, he was not breathing, and he was blue. They took him without me even seeing him and started resuscitating him right away, getting him breathing, and they kept saying, come on, little guy, come on, and it was horrifying. That's just not what you wanted to happen. It just wasn't the plan. They did get him going. They put him in a gurney, this big plastic incubator box, and they whisked him off to the NICU. My husband went with him. I was just alone, not knowing where my kid was, never having met him or really saw him. So it wasn't until several hours later when I went to NICU that I was able to even see him. When I did, he was hooked up to all these IVs and monitors and alarms, and I just didn't feel, like I could hold him. And every time I tried to go into the NICU ward, I felt like I was having to ask for permission. They seemed very possessive over him, and it was very uncomfortable. A funny thing that happened through this whole process was while they were resuscitating him and trying to get him okay, the other staff that were still working on me passed this bucket in front of my face, and inside was this creature, like this thing. It was gross. I didn't know what it was, so I asked the person next to me. I was like, what was in that bucket? And they said, well, that's the placenta, the afterbirth. And I was like, oh, I know some people eat it and they encapsulate it or they somehow ingest it and it's supposed to have all these benefits. But in that moment, this thing was so gross. I was looking at it and I stared at her. I just said, I'm not going to eat that. And she looked at me and she was like, it's okay. You don't have to eat it. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to eat it. Just so we're clear. What I would do differently through this whole thing, knowing what I know now, knowing how distracted and vulnerable I was in this whole birthing process, is I would hire a doula, a person that is trained to assist in births that you hire outside of the hospital to come in with you. And I want this person to be really mean and to have like a whip and an eye patch and really be in there to stand up for me. I'd like someone else to know what my wishes are, what my plans are, to know what my rights are, what the rights of my child are, and to keep this whole thing from happening where it felt like it was out of my control. I'd like someone else to help facilitate what our needs are and what's going on. Normally I could stand up for myself, and there are so many times when I say, I should have said something or I should have known, and there was so much going on. I would have liked outside help. So that's what I would have done differently. The best part about this whole thing was when we got out of the hospital, when we were able to take that baby, bring him home, and have that quiet moment in the house. That's when I was able to fall in love with him. It was just so special. It wasn't how I thought it would be, but it was really worth it. That whole process, when you finally do get that moment, even if it's not when you think it's going to be, is worth every second.